I will say that by far and large, over the past 3 to 4 years, I have heard the Enneagram. It feels like it's in a lot of ways taken over the space as the primary go-to by therapists like you and people in this self-help space, as it seems so, I don't know if it's fair to say robust, but it seems to have eclipsed the other ones. So, but tell us how, maybe explain it, or even maybe how it differs from the others, whatever you think is most helpful.
Sure. Well, just to help people, the Enneagram is a personality typing system that teaches there are 9 personality styles, one of which we adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to navigate the new world of relationships, and to protect ourselves, right? There's an underlying motivation for each of these types that powerfully influences how it habitually and predictably acts, thinks, and feels from moment to moment on a daily basis.
Ian, you start your book off talking about your experience in AA. And after you gave your first personal testimony there, your sponsor comments about the crazy stories each of us come up with to make sense of our lives. And in looking at the Enneagram as a tool for self-awareness, do you feel like that's very much the point? It's somewhat of an antidote to the crazy stories we come up with and try to, how we reconcile who and how we are.
Yeah, I think that the Enneagram is a malleable system that can be approached from lots and lots of different angles. And I came up with this narrative angle, right? This idea that the Enneagram reveals 9 narrative or 9 narratives or stories that people gravitate toward and adopt in childhood to make sense of their lives. And because we need narratives or stories, right, to understand who we are and how the world works. And it's really important, and I'm sure we're going to get to this, that we figure out what the story is that we are navigating our lives by, and that it's true, right?
That was my next point, because the next thing that he says is his question was, do you ever wonder if you're living in the wrong story? And so I'm going to ask you that. What does living, well, first off, I feel like I don't know that we believe that. I mean, we just believe. That's what continues to kind of bother me, is that we just believe that this is reality. We believe what we understand, what we perceive, what we experience, and we believe that is true. And here you are saying that no, or your sponsor talked about that, and you're talking about that we can live in the wrong story. And is that, as not that we can simplify it, but we can have errant perceptions that give us a story and say that we are not in a reality, or we're in an errant reality, or at least in a much more negative and converse reality than we could be in if we had perceived things differently at whatever time. Is that fair?
Yes. Hey, look at it this way, Kevin. We concoct these stories as little kids to make sense of what's happening to us. Now, if we drag those old narratives into adulthood and continue to live by their dictates, then you are essentially, as an adult, living in a children's story.
Wow.
And that is not what we want to do.
A make-believe children's story.
Mm-hmm.
That's harsh. On AA, since you started the book off there, I mean, how many addicts would you say, just to focus on that, are hiding or numbing or just lost because they are living in as you just said, a make-believe children's story, not of their choosing? You could even say that they're victimized by, but either way, give me a percentage.
There's even a better percentage.
Okay.
Everybody is an addict.
Okay.
So let's get straight there.
All right.
Okay. So you could be a chemical addict. You could be what's called a process addict, which would be compulsive behavior. So that might be watching porn, or it might be, eating 15 bags of Fritos every day, or, the list is so long, it's unreal. all of which serve to help us avoid feeling feelings that might be too overwhelming for us, or at least that we perceive are too overwhelming for us. I just am going to say, I think everybody, not just addicts, are living in flawed or broken stories. Pieces of them might be true, but largely, I think, and this is my experience as a therapist, the underlying premise of each of those stories is wrong. So, we'll jump into this perhaps a little bit later on, but I could give a 1-sentence or 2-sentence description of where the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we think the world works are just misunderstandings. They're old narratives that served us as little kids, but now limit us as adults.
You said a 1-sentence.
Yeah. I could give a 1 or 2-sentence description of how each of these 9 stories that people in the typically tell, right? So, like I said, this is approaching it through the lens of the Enneagram, and I essentially think there are just 9 basic stories that people tell. I mean, it's not like there's a trillion stories, but 9 fundamental archetypal stories that people tell themselves, or let's call them, or variants of those stories.
Okay, that's what enamored me with the book. Is that fair? Is that too much to literally just list through right here? I would normally not do that, go through a list like that, but is that too much to do? Is that fair to hit through those? Because I read through them. And folks, of course, I'm shamelessly promoting the book, The Story of You. You can go through those, because when you tell the stories, and I've been exposed to a lot of personality profiles. I had done the Enneagram in the past. And yet in reading just those basic stories that are like on page 39 or something like that, I can't remember. Not only did I resonate really easily with my Enneagram number, but it was really obvious to me, and also which ones I was not. It helped me see them a lot more clearly. And I hadn't thought about you doing that, but you want to do that? A 1-sentence on each one?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
and you could even start there.
Are you?
I'm a
Are
7.
you a 3?
No, well,
7. Okay.
That's a story too. I want you to do this, and then I've got some questions on that, because I'm a 7. It's almost a 3, and apparently almost a 5. And I took it 2 times within a almost 2-year gap. And it was very similar, but some variations there. And I've got some questions on that. But if you want to, for those folks who don't know at all, never been exposed to the Enneagram, maybe they know of personality profiles at large, the DISC profile, Myers-Briggs, everybody hears that. Most people have heard the Enneagram. I will say that by far and large, over the past 3 to 4 years, I have heard the Enneagram. It feels like it's in a lot of ways taken over the space as the primary go-to by therapists like you and people in this self-help space, as it seems so, I don't know if it's fair to say robust, but it seems to have eclipsed the other ones. So, but tell us how, maybe explain it, or even maybe how it differs from the others, whatever you think is most helpful.
Sure. Well, just to help people, the Enneagram is a personality typing system that teaches there are 9 personality styles, one of which we adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to navigate the new world of relationships, and to protect ourselves, right? There's an underlying motivation for each of these types that powerfully influences how it habitually and predictably acts, thinks, and feels from moment to moment on a daily basis. So here are these 9 types. I'm going to just give a few sentences on each, and I'm going to describe their unconscious motivation and the story they tell themselves that limits them and is self-sabotaging in adulthood. Helped them as little people, but hurts them as adults. Okay.
Yep.
So type 1s are called the improvers. They're honest, they're conscientious, they're detail-oriented, really self-disciplined. I'd say morally heroic people. And the underlying false premise of their story is the belief that the world loves and rewards only the good people and judges the bad ones. So if you're trapped in the improver story, you try to gain love and a sense of control by pushing down your anger, meeting your own high internal standards, and seeking to perfect yourself, others, in the world. Okay.
Which did I read?
So
You used to call that the perfectionist, I think, and you changed it to the improver.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah, probably because I got so many emails from improvers saying, why is our signifier the only negative sounding one on the Enneagram? So,
okay. Okay. All right. That's good.
so twos are called the helpers. These are people who are giving, they're supportive, they're caring, they're servant-hearted people, and they desperately want to be liked and appreciated. And people who inhabit this fiction of the helper unconsciously believe that they can't be loved for who they are, but only for what they do for others. So it makes sense then that disavowing their own needs and helping others becomes their strategy for gaining love and approval. Okay. Now, threes are called the performers. Now, you know a lot of these people, so do I. They're driven, goal-crushing, image-conscious, and accomplishment-focused people whose dominant story is based on the mistaken notion that being successful and avoiding failure at all costs is the only pathway to being valued and loved.
Okay, right? I'll share mine when you're done here, because that's almost my top one. I mean, that's almost who I am, but apparently I just fall over into another one. So, but that's the one I completely resonate with. Yet I do another one too. So you can help me reconcile that. So keep going.
Great. Fours, we think there are fewer fours in the general population than any other type. We think there are more sixes in the population than any other type, followed by nines. So fours are kind of the unicorn of the Enneagram, and I will cop to the fact that I am a four. Okay.
Okay.
They are called the individualists. They are creative, they're sensitive, they're temperamental, they are emotionally intense people whose story revolves around the misguided idea that they're missing something crucial inside. And until they regain it, they'll never be loved or understood or feel whole and welcome in the world. So fours can become addicted to their own suffering. They seek to shore up a shaky self-image and achieve belonging by appearing special and unique. Okay. Now, let's hit fives. And I know that was a question you have about your own life experience. They're called the investigators. They're private, highly observant, analytical, and at times, usually, emotionally distant. So the fives story centers around the idea that the world is intrusive and makes more demands on them than they can meet, particularly in the sphere of relationships. So fives then protect themselves against intrusion by reducing their own needs, observing rather than participating in life, isolating and gaining knowledge. Oh boy, do they gain knowledge. Information is power, friends. So it's gaining knowledge to fend off feelings of ineptitude and inadequacy.
Okay.
So sixes, right? I love sixes. They're called the loyalists. They're warm, trustworthy, questioning, anxious people, and their broken story revolves around their belief that the world is a dangerous place in which the only way to feel safe and certain is to remain hypervigilant, to forge strong alliances, and prepare for the worst. I have a friend of mine who's a six, man. And he likes to say, I suffer from pre-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, I've never heard that. That's excellent.
Yeah, because they have this anxiety. They're always future tripping about what could go wrong. All right.
Wow.
Sevens are called the enthusiasts, and the self-limiting narrative of the seven arises from their unconscious belief that painful emotions, thoughts, or situations have to be avoided at all costs. So they're charming, they're intelligent, they're entertaining, they're very future focused, optimistic, sometimes toxically positive, and adventurous, right? They're afraid of really being trapped in negative feelings from which they fear they can, never escape, right? Mm-hmm. Eights are called the challengers. The eight's broken story centers around this belief that we live in a dog-eat-dog universe where the powerful dominate and take advantage of the innocent and weak. So to survive, Eights believe that they have to assert strength and power over people in the environment in order to mask their own vulnerability and weakness, both from themselves and others. All right.
Okay.
Now, finally, nines. They're called the peacemakers. I am married to a 9. I got a daughter who's a 9. I have a daughter who's an 8. I also have a son who's a 7. We're all over the map in my house, right?
Okay.
So the peacemaker story centers around the unconscious belief that the world thinks their presence doesn't really matter. And therefore, to avoid disconnection and to keep internal and external peace, 9s believe they have to just go with the flow, avoid conflict, and merge with the preferences, viewpoints, and opinions and priorities of another individual or a group. So those are the 9 stories in short, right? And do you see how each of them is fundamentally broken and how it could limit people?
I do, and I greatly appreciate the focus, even though somebody could look at it and feel like that's just a pessimistic look at it. So let's first off reconcile that. I mean, this obviously you can take the Enneagram and find out the glories and the beauties of that. And I grew up really with a focus on the DISC profile. Matter of fact, my dad, Dan Miller, 48 Days fame, is one of the, I think, biggest sellers of the DISC profile. Now, I know he loves the Enneagram too, but they do that. And my entry point into that, or my primary perception or experience, was that we take that, we figure out really where our strengths are. And I was thinking about it from a work vocational context, and look at that and go, okay, that's where I want to spend my time, is in my strengths vocationally, and maximize those and get help with the places I'm weak, delegate those, whatever. I get that. But here, obviously, everybody, there's glorious stories about incredible people in all 9 of these profiles here. And yet you come into it and go, yeah, okay, but this is where you're going to tend to, this is your weakness. This is your errant story that you're going to live in. And man, I just relate. I want to say that, Ian, I relate significantly. I've been in, personal therapy for a long time now, and will always be. And this, you're right. I mean, as I go through there and read this, I go, yeah, this is where I fall when I am unaware, when I am weak. And this is, to a degree, well, let me ask you that, because you talk in the book about, in essence, I'm going to paraphrase, but saying, as you got into this, you studied this, you embraced this, you engaged with it, and you became a new man. You became a new person, in essence. And I'm going to ask that, tell me what that looks like, because I've struggled with that. Am I going to look at this with hope and expectation that I literally wake up one morning and I no longer have those old programs, those old narratives, those old, actually, you use the word scripts, talking about our buddy Donald Miller, but those old scripts coming through, I'm going to actually get rid of those? Or are they all probably going to still be there? And I may wake up 20 years from now to one of those scripts rolling, but I just know it. I recognize it and I dismiss it. And tell me. Okay.
So first of all, you just made an interesting point that these sound so negative, right? Each of these stories sounds so negative. So to be clear, in the book, I also talk about some of the very positive dimensions.
Yes.
The Enneagram, here's what differentiates the Enneagram from DISC, StrengthsFinders, Myers-Briggs, Colby, Hogan. You and I could go on with a long list of these instruments, right, for developing self-knowledge.
Right.
The reason I love the Enneagram is it's going to tell you that the best of who you are is the worst of who you are, and the worst of who you are is the best of who you are, right? It's like what's best about you is what's worst about you. If you overplay the best, it's going to become the worst.
Your strength is your weakness. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, and I like it for that very reason, because it's like, hey, we've got to face the truth about ourselves before we can live into the best about ourselves. We have to look at the negative stories before we can live into the best positive stories, right? So it's a very realistic system, right? The Enneagram doesn't pull any punches. When you find out your Enneagram type, usually you're a little appalled because you're like, someone's been reading my mail, man, and this is really uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
So I like it because it's like, hey, let's not fool around here. Let's go look at the shadow so that we can move into the light about who we are. And so, to be clear, this book is for people who know that something's not working, that something's broken, that their marriage, their career, the things that they dreamt, the things they hoped for, the rules that they lived by, the beliefs that they've acquired are just not serving them. They're in all these areas of our lives are kind of rickety or failing. And so I think, by the way, that's 100% of the population, unless you have some kind of charmed, what I call reality resistance disorder, right? Mm-hmm. It's like all of us have broken lives. We're trying to figure out. And my thing is, look, man, at the root of it is a broken story. Here are these 9 archetypal stories. One of them is probably, or most definitely, is a variant of yours. Figure out which one. And then as the book sort of lays out, let's figure out how to rewrite that story. Or, as you said, recognize when the story has launched.
Yeah.
And we are again living, we're living under the tyranny of it. And here's how we can get out in the moment.
What resonates so much with me, Ian, is you saying that this is the best of you and the worst of you and the best of you. What I found in myself, what is a primary premise of my book that comes out in about 6 weeks called What Drives You on Drive. I have an audience here of people who are aspiring people. They have primarily realized areas of success. And in this context, I'm going to say they have taken their whatever number they are. And in the strength part of that, and the glorious part of that, they have taken that and they have achieved successes. And yet, as you're saying, that best part of you also has a worst part. Being unaware of that is where they are failing. And it's frustrating. It was to me that over here, I'm having these great successes. And it was so it is so frustrating that then over here, the math doesn't work. I feel like I'm applying the same principles of success, if you would, that are rocking it over here in this area of my life. And they're killing me over here. It's not working out. And I feel like I'm doing the same thing and it's frustrating. And it was being unaware of just what you talked about, that strength has a dark side in essence. If it's not held, I saw your eyes got wide. Held. Okay. So tell me that so many people are here. And that's what's frustrating because they're having success and they're having failure. And we want to have success beget success. And yet you're showing us that no, if we're unaware and what would you say? Unfiltered, unmodified, unhealthy in it, then that's when we're going to go awry.
Yeah. So, years ago, Cornell University Business School, they did a study of 72 high-performing CEOs of companies ranging in value from $50 million to $5 billion. And what they wanted to find out was what characteristic or quality did each of those men and women have that accounted for their disproportionate success?
Yeah.
Here is a single line from the conclusion of the study that blew the researchers away and myself when I read it. They said this: the key predictor of success in business is self-awareness. Now, that's an amazing statement, right? You would think it's grit, determination, the ability to do long-range planning, all these hard skills.
I want it to be those, Ian. I want it to be those things. Those are so much easier. Yeah.
You bet. But it's self-knowledge, self-awareness, knowing where your shadow is. It's knowing about your broken story when it launches and then realizing how it affects you and others in the moment, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding how your personality, how you show up for life, let's define personality that way, impacts the environment for good or for bad, right? So self-awareness could be also to sort of maybe described as the ability to observe, monitor, and regulate the way that you act, think, and feel from moment to moment in a business setting, at home, in CVS, wherever you may be, right?
Yeah.
So the Enneagram, I think, more than any other instrument, helps people develop self-awareness. And a key part of it is, what's the story I've been living? How can I jettison those parts of the story that no longer serve me? How can I rewrite the story? And how can I, and because as you said, listen, these stories are sticky. You've got them as a little person. You've been living it a long time. How do I begin to recognize when this story is again taking hold of my life and immediate experience? What do I do so I can step out of it into a much more beautiful, adult story that I want to live?
Okay, I've got a big ticket question that I'm going to ask you,
Okay.
that I've grappled with, honestly, Ian. And I do even here, as I continue to look at the incredible ramifications of our childhood, of our initial programming. We could say of our genetics before that, but then of our programming, and realize how much that shapes us. We just had Vienna Farron on the show. Her new book is The Origins of You. And it's talking about that, the power of that origin story.
Mm-hmm.
So with everybody listening, if they grew up in the remote woods, like my kids do, or in the middle of the Bronx, of a big city, if they grew up in America or India, as an only child in a big family, wealthy or poor, loving parents, or they were orphaned or abused parents. They were affirmed and belonged, or they were shunned and rejected. They were born as a Saudi prince or into sex slavery. Would you attest that regardless, their Enneagram profile should come out the same? And I asked that, Ian, because I've struggled with some of, oh my gosh, as I look back at the power of my programming and the things that I embraced and the stories that I wrote for myself, consciously or not, and then lived in, I can almost go back and go, man, I have no idea who or what I would have been naturally. Is there a natural me somewhere there because of my crafting? Now I feel like I'm trying to rewrite the story, but I can almost get lost and wonder I don't know what I would have been. So is that a fair to say? Do you look at it as it is this is your genetic predisposition, no matter how you had come into this world?
Yeah. So I think personality is essentially the product of genetics, right? Biology,
Okay.
and of environment.
Okay.
Now, is it 50-50? Is it 70-30? Is it 86-14, percent? I think that moves around depending on the person, right? And I would also say, I'm a therapist, Kevin. I've worked mostly as a consultant in the corporate sphere. However, in my experience, when I worked with clients, one of the things that they would sometimes do is get sort of lost in sort of what I call side eddy questions. Like sometimes a counseling client would say to me, "Why me?" And eventually, I can work with that question for a little while. I just say, "Well, why not? Why
Okay.
not you?" It sounds harsh and cold, but after a while, it's like, does it really matter now in the immediate? Like, we got to deal with what is right now.
That's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's do what's in front of us and not get kind of like thrown off into side questions too far that are interesting, but might be a distraction from us doing the real work at hand.
Okay, that's fair. So then another aspect of that question, and I know, and I'm not, I've done the Enneagram. I've tried to learn some. I'm not an expert in it. I know that you have different ways of saying, hey, this is who you are in your health, in essence. This is your propensity. In your unhealth, you can sometimes fall into another number, another category. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah. It's a slightly complicated question, but let's put it this way. The personality operates on a continuum from health to unhealth, right?
Okay.
It also, we might think of it as from awareness, being a very self-aware person, to a person who's operating like an automaton. We're just moving through life asleep. And when you do that without any awareness, you bang guardrail to guardrail through your business, through your friendships, through your marriage, your kids, everything. Now that continuum, you're kind of moving around on that continuum all day, right? It's not like, oh, I'm a very self-aware person and you're always living there. Right.
Yeah.
It's fluid. It's moving around. Right. Now, I think that, yes, the Enneagram teaches that when I'm a 4, so when I'm doing really well, I start to look, act, and feel like a Enneagram 1 who's very healthy. Now, I will always be a 4. I never become a 1. Because my unconscious motivation never changes. However, I just start to really look like it. like a healthy 1. When I'm not doing great, I start to look like an unhealthy 2. And each number, because it's a dynamic system. So are you still a 7, do you think? The enthusiast, or do you think you're more of the performer, the 3?
Can I try to explain and have you help me figure it out?
Yeah, but before you do that, let's say you were a 3.
Okay.
When you are doing great, you're really a self-aware person. You're going to look like and act like and feel like a healthy 6. And when you're not doing great, you're going to start to look like an unhealthy 9. So if people could see the diagram of the Enneagram right now, they'd see these arrows flying around. And those arrows actually are pointing to the different places that each type goes to in health and unhealth. Right? So it's a great question. It's also one of the benefits of the Enneagram.
Yeah. And that's what interests me, because I look at it, Ian, and so when I took the Enneagram, and I took it, took one of them a few years ago, took one recently, and they both come on and they have me as a 7. I think that's who I am in health. I think that's the natural me, but I embraced the performer. I like the accolades, the affirmation, the acceptance, the approval that I got from performing. And so I really embraced that. And that's the story I wrapped myself around, not the enthusiast as much. I was that in health, I think, but I really embraced the performer. And as I did that and lived that story, I came to a place of burnout, of trying to earn everything and trying to fix everything and trying to be Superman. I came to a place of burnout. And I feel like, and it's interesting as I look at my results, I feel like in that unhealth, I retreated, and I really retreated into a 5. And I'm open to you saying that I'm, this is a mark of insanity or something. This doesn't work, but I'm wondering if it fits somehow, because
I feel that you have multiple personality disorders.
Well, I'm open to that. I think some people in my family might attest to that. Well, actually, that's it though, because if I looked at my family and if you talked with them, I think they would say, yeah, I see daddy or husband. I see him in health and happiness over here. But then I see him in unhealth and he comes over here. And I wonder if that's in health, a 7, in unhealth, I retreat to a 5. And yet I'm kind of always a 3. I'm always performing. I've had a hard time letting go of that. So play with that with me.
Sure. So first of all, to be clear to the audience, you are all 9 types. Okay. You contain all 9 types.
Okay.
You only have one that's dominant. So we call that your dominant type. So if you're, I'm a 4, that's my dominant type. But trust me, there are times today when I'm going to be a 1 improver. I'm going to be a 6 loyalist. I'm going to be a 9 peacemaker, right? They're all in there. It's just 1 is dominant.
Okay.
So that can sometimes confuse people, and I can tell you how to get out of that confusion. The 3, you're going to see that it has some overlap characteristics or features with the 7. 3s are very optimistic. They're very future oriented. They are very confident. 3s have trouble naming feelings. 7s have trouble actually moving toward difficult feelings. So sometimes that looks alike, right? If you're a 3, the unconscious motivation is you have a need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs, because you see a world that only values people for what they do and accomplish versus for who they are inside. That's just the way you sort of saw the world growing up. It's a broken story, but there it is.
Well, can I get candid and admit some that I do tend to see that. I see that in myself, that I'm sitting here doing, and this sounds terrible. I hate to admit that, but I tend to value success. And I value people who are pursuing success. And if they are not, according to mine, I think I can feel judgmental at worst, and at best, I just don't understand. I just don't resonate.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that makes sense for sure.
Yeah. If you're a 3, I bet you lots of your listeners are 3s, right? So here's the deal. You're going to be someone who cares a tremendous amount about productivity.
Mhm.
You're going to be all about efficiencies. How do I get across the finish line first and fastest? Right.
I was a pro cyclist, Ian. That was my life for
Okay.
15 years.
Yeah.
I don't care what's wrong with the bike, what's wrong with the environment, what's wrong with I don't care about anything. You either stay on that guy's wheel in front of you, or you're going to lose the pack and you have no shot for the end. So if you're at 100%, you go 110%. No
Yeah.
excuses, no limits, and that's what gets you on the podium.
It's also what probably has gotten you through business. It's
Mhm.
gotten you through lots of stuff in life. I'm sure it wasn't just limited to the bicycling thing. That might be a metaphor for the whole of your life.
It would be, and yes, and yet that's also, let's go back to what you said, the strength and the weakness, or the best and the worst. It's also what I took into relationships and wrecked them with.
Yes. So that's the result of a broken story. You organized your life around that broken story of I got to be successful. Kevin, I have a what's the equivalent of a mastermind group. I got 7 guys. They are very high achieving men. I mean, extraordinarily high achieving. So we're talking about private equity guys, venture capitalists, CEOs, people who are heirs to fortunes, right? And now are running family offices. That kind of level of person. And we spend the first weekend of our time together. We do 3 to 4 weekends a year in fantastic places, deconstructing the story that has dominated their life and has made them successful in business, but has ruined their marriages, made them estranged from their children, given them heart attacks, and also that have made them tremendously successful and given them great satisfaction. So it's a little bit of it's a mixed deal here, right? And again, as they learn to understand the story, they go, oh, that's why that happened.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like the penny drops and they go, I want a new story. Because I'm at a point in my life where the old one, I am out of ammo. That's one of the things one of my guys said. I'm out of ammo. I need a new story. I have beaten the old one to death, tried to make it work. It did a little bit in some areas, but now I gotta figure out what it is about that story that's sabotaging the very things I most want to succeed at in life, which is relationships and friendships and loving my kids and doing all the things that ultimately will matter. Because you know what, Kevin, you know this, in 100 years from now, no one will care how much money you made. They won't even know. No, in 30, 40 years from now, no one's going to say, damn, that guy had a big house.
There's another show we
won't.
could do right there of men. I would even say specifically American men in their 50s and 60s who are now they're sitting there and going, "Oh my gosh, I'm just done. I'm done, and I want something that matters. I want legacy." I just spent some time in Mexico with a group of 12 guys talking about legacy. Very similar stories. Well, you said the word a couple times, motive, and I want to understand that, because that feels, and I'm not pushing back against the genetic, nurture versus nature thing, but I'm asking if we look at our motive, and if I understand, become aware of my story, especially the errancy of my story and what's motivating that, and now going, okay, I don't have to win and earn people's love. I do not have to perform for my self-worth. I am worthy as unto God and myself. And if I change my motive, but again, you're saying if I change it, doesn't mean that I become a different number on the Enneagram, but I can become healthy and balanced in it. Is that a fair word? Okay.
Yeah, you would become a healthier version, or you would become the highest expression of who you are.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where we want to get, and also to be clear, Kevin, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I'm an artist. Artists are disproportionately represented. 4s or more artists are 4s probably than any other type. There's parts of that story I love that have served me well and that I always want to be grateful for. But there are parts of that story that led me to become an addict myself. And so for me, it's just the awareness of it that has been so helpful in terms of having self-compassion, recognizing I wasn't consulted about the story I inherited. You know what I mean? Like no one's, I got to, I have a therapist friend of mine who used to say to me, Ian, this is your life. These are the cards. And now the question is, what are you going to do with them?
Yeah.
Like these are the cards you got, man. Don't argue with the cards. They are what they are.
Mhm.
Now, what are we going to do with them? And I would apply that lens to this idea of story. These are the cards, man. I did have an abusive childhood, physically, emotionally, sexually. A father who died of drug addiction and alcoholism, a mother who was completely lost in the middle of all that. You can imagine the wreckage of that.
Yeah.
Those are the cards, man. Those are the cards. Now, I've had to say to myself, I've had a broken story that tried to help me deal with the feelings of that childhood through drugs and alcohol. I was very fortunate and lucky to be able to deal with that and to move on in life. Still had a lot of work to do, but so much of it was saying, I'm not a victim. I'm not going to fall prey to self-pity. I got work to do. It may be harder than what other people have to do, and it may be less difficult than what some other people have to do, but it's the cards I got a deal in order to move forward into a new story. Because that old story, I was drowning in it, right? So we got to move, and I think that's true of all of us.
And I do appreciate that and want to point that out in, I hope, compassion, that we're saying, we can all become that healthiest version of ourselves. But some, as you talked about, unfortunately have been dealt cards, and your journey there is going to be harder. End of story.
You know what? I mean, that the fact is, life is ruinously unfair.
Yeah.
And, this is why, for those of us who have made advances in our lives, we've been fortunate. Whatever word you want to use, fortunate, blessed, subjects of grace. I don't know. The fact is that our job is in part to reach down or reach next door and help others who have a steeper staircase to walk to find their way up to the places we are or places ahead of us on the journey.
I want to ask a question. This has a little relation to your prior book, The Road Back to You. Mm-hmm. And as I was ruminating on that a little bit, it reminded me of Tama Bryant. She's the new president of the American Psychological Association. So we had her on the show a few months back, and her book is called Homecoming: Overcoming Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. So to reclaim, and yours is The Road Back to You. And I think what I grapple with some, and it kind of goes to my pondering a moment ago of looking back and going, who knows? To some degree, I'm questioning, who knows what the natural me would have been, because there is no natural as far as environmental, well, even genetics. There is no, I don't start at ground zero. We don't start with a clean, computer and then load this OS onto it for the first time. I came with an OS already programmed into me. So in that, wondering, how many people are going to resonate with coming like that, the road back, coming back to the whole me, or am I finding the whole me maybe for the first time? I've struggled with that a little bit. Help me reconcile that.
Yeah. Sometimes I hear people talk about, the true self, that sort of idea that there is some pure expression of who we are out there that we want to find our way back to, because that's going to be the place of greatest health and joy. Okay, it's a great metaphor. It's a worthy thing to consider, but let's just face the fact there is no static ideal you out there waiting for you to come back to it. Yeah. Human beings are not things, they're processes. You are an ever evolving thing. So to get back to some other reality might actually be going backwards.
Okay.
So
thanks.
You want to be a person that's involved in the co-creation of the immediate process of who you are. So yes, I do think, and there's a lot of psychology around this, that we want to kind of get back in contact with the person we were before the world told us who we were supposed to be. Before the world threw scripts onto us, threw a story onto us that we bought into because we were little kids and didn't know any better, right? So I understand that. I think that's part of the human journey, but I'm always very careful to tell people, look, there is no idealized self of you out there. You are a process that is, advancing, hopefully in a forward
Mhm.
direction. And it's much better to deal with who you are right now than to worry about who you were or some ideal out there, some platonic ideal floating around out there in the ether.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It amazes me because you're talking about genetics at one aspect, that we have pre-programming in our genetics. Then the day we are conceived and we are in a womb, and that 9-month process, we are exposed to so much through that host, through that womb, that
Yep.
we're exposed to the
Yep.
anxieties, the excitements, the feelings, the very air that they breathe starts that, again, for lack of a better term, programming process that is shaping us and shaping how we come
Yeah.
into the world, what we understand, how we perceive it.
So you earlier on we're talking about OS, right? Like we have some programming. You used the idea of an operating system that equates to our programming, if you will. And what I would say that what the book The Story of You is talking about is the line of broken code in that programming.
Okay.
So all of us have lines of broken code, and I'd say that the through the lens of this particular book, that broken code is revealed in these broken stories, right? That's one way of looking at it. We have to go back into the operating system as part of the human journey to fix the code, man, that we can fix. I can't make you. Let me put it this way: my one of my kids is an 8, so they are a challenger. They're aggressive. They can be notoriously blunt. They are hard drivers. They can be, when they're not healthy, intimidating, and they can be elbow throwers. Okay.
Mm.
Now, one of the great things about this child of mine, she's done a terrific amount of work on herself. She has gone in and looked at the broken code, and she has crafted a new story that is a healthier, and it takes all that energy and channels it in right directions. Can I tell you something? She came out of the womb that way. I'm
Mm.
just telling you.
Okay.
She came out, like just on fire. I have another kid, a 9, a peacemaker. She came out like the Dalai Lama, man. She just lay in your arms as peaceful and happy as you can imagine, right? I have a 7 enthusiast. He came out laughing his head off. They were just clearly genetically inclined toward those different types. The environment, things like that, they can learn, by the way, with each of those temperaments, to recognize, oh, wait a minute, I'm a enthusiast. That's built into my DNA. But how do I manage that temperament so that I don't end up being led around on a chain by it in ways that are unhealthy?
Well, and even amongst my grappling, hearing you talking about that, I mean, it's so relevant, that analogy in my life. So, Ian, I've got 9 kids. And
Wow.
yeah, I've got a few kids. And interesting. So I've got 7 biological. So 7 that have the same mother, the same father. And I was going to say the same environment. Obviously, life changes and we move here and we do this or whatever, but they have had very much the same programming. And to see the differences in them should very solidify the the nature aspect of our propensities and predispositions. And really even one that does more, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, Ian, I've got a 10-year-old, and she came to us when she was 4, from a very broken place. And in my naivety, I figured she's going to come into our house. We're going to love her. Everything will be great. It has rocked my world to see in our inability to just do away with those first 4 years, much less what she experienced in the womb, which was hell.
Yes.
And then beyond that, and to see that, not that we can't help it dramatically. And she is an incredibly, incredible little girl. And yet I don't think that initial, programming, OS, whatever, I don't think she's ever going to get rid of it. That's the card she was dealt. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, right?
Yeah.
That is completely true. But we don't want to fall into the mistake of fatalism.
Okay.
That, okay, this is how it's always going to be. There's never going to be. Now, that said, the human personality, who we are, If you meet anyone who says, I know exactly how you got to be that way, they're lying to you. I don't care how many PhDs or MDs they have. There is so much uh, debate within the world of psychology about personality development.
Mhm.
And it's crazy. It may be the most hotly contested subject in psychology. One of the things you just mentioned that affects personality dramatically is trauma. So you're talking about a child, from the sound of it. Again, I'm doing this from a distance. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but that has experienced profound trauma.
Yeah.
And so that child has to, with loving parents like yourself and professionals, outside people, has to work through the effects of that trauma, so that they can have the healthiest experience of life and a personality that is healthy and whole and able to move through the world with, you know, with joy and with, an acceptable amount of friction. Right.
Mm.
So again, man, things like trauma enter the picture that, so it's a very complicated landscape that we're talking about here. And things like the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, things like that, cannot possibly account for all the possible complexities that come to make a human being, right? They're useful, but they ain't perfect, right? So again, I say that because I'm always trying to tell people, look, this is a great system, but if you think it's going to explain all the mysteries of your life and of who you are, you're going to be disappointed, right? Because nothing can.
Fair. Well, I mean, when you come back to the predispositions, these are just my propensities. It doesn't define me, as you're saying. It's not a fatalistic approach to it, but these are as my buddy, the doc, would say, these are the ruts that are grooved into my brain that I'm going to tend to fall into naturally. So being aware of those, I want to skip to another part in the book that to me, again, was so incredibly telling for self-awareness. And it was where you talk about passions and virtues. And you've got a simple list there of, here's your number. And according to those, these are the passions and virtues. And in that scenario, is this a correct paraphrasing? You're talking about the passions as far as what you fall to from an appetite standpoint, like an unhealthy appetite. Is that a fair perspective on it?
Yeah. So the passions are what are sometimes called the fixations.
Fixation. That's good.
So it's interesting that the original pioneers of the Enneagram noted that each of the 9 types seem to be powerfully influenced by what we've come to understand as the 7 deadly sins. Now they added 2 more on, and from a psychological perspective, it makes complete sense to me as a therapist, right? So what the passion is this, the fixation is this powerful emotional driver inside that in many ways dictates how our particular type operates, right? So if you're a 3, the passion really is deceit. Now, deceit meaning not so much that you are deceiving others as much as yourself, because the 3 has this amazing ability to, almost in a chameleon-like fashion, continually to swap out masks to win the admiration of who it is that they might be with in any given moment, right? And they might do it to make.
I mean, that's,
and they might do it.
It's me. Yeah.
Is that you?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
me. And when I look at deceit, I'm thinking, I'm not a liar. I thought, wait a minute. Deceit, as you just talked about it, I deceive myself. My primary one has been in not paying attention to my own feelings and emotions. I have no place for them. Just like we're back in a bike race. I have no place for the flat tire or the rain or the whatever. We're just going to go for the line. And so I'm deceitful about the reality of me. And of course, okay. And then on the other side of that, to jump at the virtue, the health, to move from the passion of virtue, is authenticity. And that has been a part of my admission in therapy, is that, like, let's be honest with my wife. I've never been honest with my feelings. I had no idea, Ian. I've always thought that, man, I'm not private, man. I'm an open book right here. You want to talk? Let's just talk. And I'll talk about ideas and thoughts and whatever. But then you say, Kevin, tell me how you feel. Well, no, let's go to the next question. Let's go to the next question. I'm not honest there.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
So as a therapist and as a guy who consults with these high achieving guys, one of the things I told one of my men yesterday is he's going through a crisis, a terrific crisis, right? And I said to him, I said the difficulty of therapy and of the work that we're doing together, which is more consulting and coaching than therapy, I said, is that you come face to face with the fact that many of the most cherished beliefs that you have about yourself aren't true. Right? That's the difficulty, particularly early in the journey of realizing what you just said. Oh, wait a minute. I haven't been honest with my wife about my feelings. And you probably thought for a long time, I'm doing great.
I thought that was valiant. I thought it was valiant. I honestly did. Yeah.
And then you realize, uh-oh. And that's where the Enneagram can be so helpful, man. It'll save you time. You don't have to wait until you crash and burn. You can actually see in your type, oh, guess what? I'm living by this broken story. And typically 3s have a really hard time identifying their feelings, identifying the feelings of others, actually naming those feelings and getting honest with them. We have a mutual.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, my therapist, and I've talked about this so many times in the book, one of her first recommendations was Brene Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. She said, Kevin, go figure out what emotions are. Go learn the vernacular. What were you going to say? We have a mutual friend?
So again, I'm sorry for getting so passionate. You could tell I get excited about
this is what makes a good show.
Our mutual friend, Mike Hyatt, right?
Yeah.
And he won't mind me saying this about him. So, because he actually has said it on my podcast a number of times. So it's not like this is secret information that I'm, betraying a confidence. Mike has on his desktop, he's a hardcore 3. Mike has on his desktop, or did for a long time, one of those feeling wheels that a therapist will give you.
Wow.
That shows you all the names of different feelings, and they have those goofy little faces. Go with the feeling, because he knows this is a blind spot. This is a weak spot. I got to work on this thing in my life. And so he has that stuff. And again, this has saved him time. It's like, oh, wait a minute. The Enneagram tells me this is true. I know it's true because that's been my experience. Here's what I'm going to do to kind of counter that old story and begin to rewrite it. I love it.
I love it too. And I'll tell you, man, of course, you're on the show because of him. We got off the last show I did with him, and he said, man, you got to have Ian on. And he, I think, text or send us an email together. Looking at this again, the passions and the virtues, I'm interested too, in maybe an aspect of having grace for ourselves. So by just a tick, apparently I'm a 7. And looking at that, the passion is gluttony and the virtue is sobriety. And I'm interested in that one because I really like my gluttony, Ian. I really have fun with it. I love the celebrations. I'm a foodie. I love that. I love the gluttony of the outdoors and my joy of that. And I love just enmeshing myself in that. Now, the risk is addiction. And falling to that. And my latest therapist actually, and looking at that and going, because I was asking, am I addicted? And she said, I don't know. She says, I think you're dealing with, she says, you're pretty obsessive. When you like something, I find that you're obsessive about it and you just completely give into that. Now, is it an addiction? Can you stop it? Whatever, we can get into that. But I like it, and yet it feels, is that, so I guess I'm asking that in regards to the passions. Is there a place to become friends with that, but in moderation and understanding the other side of it? Can I have gluttony and sobriety? What's the balance of, actually, that's an interesting question. I'd like a word for the balance between those two. I don't know if anything pops to mind for you, but that would be interesting in making peace with those.
Yeah. So you are a 3. Your dominant passion, if you are a 3, is not gluttony, right? It would be deceit. However, because you're all 9 types, you struggle with all of those.
Yeah.
We all do. We all struggle with gluttony and sloth and envy and, being lustful. I mean, you know what I mean? Like we struggle with all of them. You just dominantly deal with deceit. Now,
yes.
as regards gluttony, For the seven, that refers to the seven's propensity to try and jam as many pleasurable, fun, interesting, exciting, and stimulating experience into the present moment as is humanly possible.
That's my motive. My motive in every moment is thinking about the next pleasure, even if it's just a cup of tea. I'm thinking about that. As soon as we finish this thing, I'm going to get a cup of tea. That's what's always predominant.
Okay. So doesn't mean you're a seven. Remember, if you're unconscious motivation, the most important thing to you is succeeding, appearing successful, and avoiding failure. Right. If that's what's most like you, even if by 5%, that's your type. Okay. You may be close to that with a seven, but seven's not you. Right. You may be very close in your score. Maybe your second highest score is 7. But if the motivation is, as I described it, you're a 3.
Yeah.
Right. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the broken story of that 7 is that, man, I cannot fall into painful feelings, experiences, situations. And to counter that, I am going to try and jam as much pleasure and fun into every given moment. Like, did you ever watch the show, not Arrested Development, Parks and Rec?
No, I know the name of it, but never saw it.
All right. Well, whatever. There's a character on it played by Rob Lowe, who is so classic 7 that it's mind boggling. Right. Anyway, it's, I've actually taught that in a film class at a university, that show, because all 9 types are represented in the main characters of that show. So it's this avoidance of pain. It's the need to reframe everything as a positive, even if it's, a negative that the rest of us would be bowled over by. It's just it's this constant need to avoid pain. So that's the gluttony piece. As you said, the virtue is an antidote to that fixation or that passion. Sobriety in that case is just like buckling down, getting focused, not flitting from one new interesting idea to the next without accomplishing very much in any sphere of your life. That's the danger. That's what sobriety is referring to.
Well, I want to encourage people on, taking the Enneagram, obviously, but then learning about it. And that's where I feel like, taking the thing and then coming into this book, the story of you, and then learning about it. Because as I read about it, and again, the propensities, and it's so funny, Ian, you actually say it's on, page 179. I wrote it down. In regards to sevens, you're talking about sevens. They're the self-help gurus and sales reps. And I think my show's called Self-Helpful. He just nailed me to the wall with that. Understanding again, you said the best can be your worst, the worst can be your best. Again, I looked at that. You talked about sevens as you have a son who's that. And you said, no one can manufacture optimism continuously without sacrificing a part of their humanity. And I feel like that's what you do with all 9 areas here. Is you take us through and go, man, this is the glory. I mean, being optimistic, that's not a bad thing. It's helped me in so many ways. It's been a gift to my life. And it's also been the bane of my existence. Same as with the 3, the performing. It has helped me, like the guys you're talking about, man, it creates success on the ball field or in the executive, in the business arena or whatnot. And yet, over here, though, if that's who you are trying to earn, it doesn't work in relationships, doesn't work in our own self-peace. And that's really what broke me, Ian, is realizing that, man, I've got a lot of things that I'm excited about, a lot of successes. I don't really have peace. I don't really have that. And it took burnout to show me that. I wish I had, there's the hope. If you haven't come to that end, is getting into this stuff, right? Self-awareness, so you can become aware of it before you hit that valley, and you have to.
Yes. And by the way, it's a grace when you hit it. And it's very hard for people to see that in the moment, right? But you got to fall apart to be put back together. If the old story, eventually that old story, if you're lucky, is going to fall apart, and you're going to have to deal with it, because guess what? Your old story isn't who you are. It was designed to protect who you are from suffering and pain. Okay. And so that's why that story is there. And as you get older, you are able to, with compassion, say to yourself, guess what? I'm an adult now. I'm here for myself. I don't need this story anymore to make sense of the world or to avoid pain. I want to live in a more adult story. And then you have the agency and the freedom to rewrite it. And the story of you not only sort of reveals the broken stories, guess what? It goes even further. The back half of that book is all about how do I claim, rewrite, and live into a new and better, truer story for my life.
I was going to ask this earlier, but I'm going to end us with it and ask you right there on the story of your life for a couple highlight aspects that you see front runners and people who are not living in the right story. They're living in that make-believe, back to where we started, that make-believe child story. So when you're face-to-face with a patient, or you are, consulting with one of your clients, or you're just out in a social gathering, some primary aspects that you see, I don't know if they're habits, behaviors from people that some of us may relate to right now, that you see when we are caught up in that wrong, unhealthy version of ourselves.
How many days you got? Let me just give you one.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
So let's say you're an improver, the Enneagram 1, so that people remember the Enneagram 1 is a person who has bought into the broken story that the world loves and rewards people only when they're good, judges them when they're bad. They want to try to gain love by, pushing down anger, accomplishing things that, or meeting their high internal standards, and then seeking to perfect themselves, others in the world. Now, I have seen that story blow people up right and left. These perfectionists who go through the world, they tend to radiate, when they're not healthy or self-aware, they radiate a resentment that other people can pick up like secondhand smoke in the environment. The resentment is that you are not as concerned with fixing everything that's broken in the environment or in the world as they are. And they're a little resentful that they have to pick up the slack for you.
Wow. Wow.
And so they tend to be, when they're not very healthy, critical, judgmental. They expect people to live up to their standards. They tend to think that their way of doing things is right and yours is wrong. They can be shaming and sort of like make you feel that you'll never be enough because you're not living up to their expectations, which are always the right expectations, right? Now, that's an unhealthy improver. How many times have you met that person?
Yeah.
Probably a bunch of times, right?
Yeah.
And that person blows up marriages, raises kids who never feel like they're going to be good enough because they couldn't live up to dad or mom's expectations, which were so high. And they were always being criticized. Your bed isn't made perfectly. You didn't get A's. It's like the story goes on and on. So when I see that, I'm going, wow, this person's trapped in the wrong story.
Yeah.
They are really trapped in a bad story here. And we got to get them out of that story so that they can experience peace, which is what we all want. You mentioned that earlier. And so that they can bring life and joy and health to everything they do and to all their relationships.
That is daunting to hear you say that, because I feel like, we so easily see other people. We see their junk, and to realize, oh man, everybody sees mine too. They see this stuff. They see my strength. They see my weakness. It'd be really interesting to have my family members take the Enneagram for me and see what we came out with. Might be immensely telling. Well, hey, in the intro, Ian, I'll put the URL and the offer for the Enneagram, and see if we can get people taking this. And you also have resources. I want them to hear that you take it, you can get the results. And like me, you're probably going to have questions, and you have resources, obviously the book, and you have in your organization resources for them to get help in understanding and reconciling that further if they want to. I mean, I'm just grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm going to send Michael Hyatt a text after this and thank him for connecting us. I'm eager to continue digging into this. Like you said, this is an ever evolving thing. This is not something I now become aware of and go, oh, and I'm good. This is something now I become aware of and I go, oh, this is my work day in and day out in the self-awareness. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for making the effort to bring this to us, and for giving me the time today to be your patient. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.